Today's press conference opened with the floor being made available to members of the media. As the session proceeded, one of the first questions addressed the recent breakground ceremony for the revitalisation of the Tanzania-Zambia Railway Authority, Tazara Railway project. The ceremony last week brought together the leadership of the three nations involved, China, Zambia and Tanzania. The Chinese Premier Li Qiang met in Lusaka with Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema and Tanzanian Vice President Emmanuel Nchimbi on the 20th of November 2025 to launch the project. In that context, Mr. Li stressed that China is willing to work with Zambia and Tanzania to advance the development of a prosperity belt along the Tazara Railway and jointly foster a new economic growth hub. He pointed out that the railway serves as a bond that closely ties the peoples of China, Tanzania and Zambia, and described its revitalisation as a landmark project in China-Africa cooperation under a shared vision for modernisation. He further emphasised that the governments of the three countries will jointly build the Tazara Railway Prosperity Belt, advance the comprehensive development of regions along the railway in a systematic manner, and unleash the potential of regional development in Tanzania and Zambia. In his remarks, he framed the revitalised railway as a path toward freedom, development, friendship, happiness, green development and harmony, and as part of a joint China-Africa project to infuse renewed vitality into social and economic development in the region. This language echoes the wording used in the joint statement released following the ceremony. The plan envisages linking infrastructure, investment, trade and industrial integration to regional development in Zambia, Tanzania and beyond. Mr. Li noted that China is ready to strengthen trade and investment facilitation with both countries, promote alignment among markets and industries, and deepen China-Africa cooperation under the framework of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, FOCAC. When asked to provide further detail, the official spokesperson reiterated the key points of the joint statement, emphasising the guiding principles of mutual respect, equal-footed consultation and joint contribution for shared benefit. They affirmed that the revitalised railway will inject new impetus into the socio-economic development of both Zambia and Tanzania, and by extension into the region surrounding the railway corridor. The question then turned to commentary on recent remarks made by Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi on the Taiwan question and the ensuing diplomatic tensions with China. The question noted that Japanese media had posted a number of social media items highlighting that the Prime Minister's comment implied the possibility of intervening in the Taiwan question by force and that this had triggered condemnation in China. The spokesperson responded, "The wrongful remarks made by the Japanese PM implied the possibility of intervening in the Taiwan question by force, which triggered the outrage and condemnation of the Chinese people. China opposes it." That remark echoed China's foreign ministry position that Japan's statements were egregious interference in China's internal affairs and issued a strong warning that Japan would bear all consequences if it were to intervene militarily in the Taiwan Strait. When pressed further by another journalist asking whether, if Japan truly wants to develop the China-Japan strategic relationship of mutual benefit and build a constructive and stable relationship, what steps Japan should take, the spokesperson said, "If Japan truly wants to develop the China-Japan strategic relationship of mutual benefit, it needs to uphold the spirit of the four political documents between China and Japan and its political commitments, correct the wrongful remarks and wrongdoings at once, and take practical steps to honour its commitments to China." That phrase refers to the four political documents dating back to the 1970s between China and Japan, which underpin their diplomatic relations and include the 1972 joint communiqué and subsequent agreements. China has repeatedly pointed to those commitments when admonishing Japan in recent weeks. Another journalist referenced recent reports in Japanese media that the Japanese government had completed its export of Patriot air defense interceptor missiles to the United States, describing this as Japan's first export of weapons of mass destruction after relaxing export controls. The question asked for comment. In reply, the spokesperson offered a detailed historical context. Following the World War II victory, international treaties and instruments such as the Cairo Declaration, the Potsdam Proclamation, and the Japanese Instrument of Surrender clearly state Japan's obligations as a defeated country, requiring Japan to be completely disarmed and not to maintain such industries as would enable her to rearm for war. The spokesperson then went on to draw a narrative. However, in recent years, Japan has kept easing the restrictions and seeking military buildup. It has increased its defence budget for 13 consecutive years and adopted the new security laws to remove the ban on exercising the right to collective self-defence. It has also replaced the 3 principles on arms exports with the 3 principles on transfer of defence equipment and technology to ease restrictions on arms exports, and even has started exporting deadly weapons. They further said, while claiming it hopes to build a world without nuclear weapons, Japan is actually strengthening cooperation on extended deterrence and even seeking to revise its 3 non-nuclear principles to open the door for enabling nuclear sharing arrangements. If Japan seeks to go back to the path of militarism, violate its commitment to peaceful development and disrupt post-war international order, the Chinese people will not allow it, and international community will not allow it. Such attempt will only end in failure. Although the exact export reference could not be immediately verified via independent sources, both Japanese and international reporting confirm that Japan, under Takaichi, is pursuing more active defence posture, including revising arms export and sharing rules, increasing defence spending and considering closer military cooperation. A subsequent question pivoted to Ukraine. At the same time, will the presence of Chinese-made weapons in the Russian occupation army in Ukraine be investigated? The spokesperson responded, "I'm not aware of what you mentioned. Let me stress that China never provides lethal weapons to any party to the conflict and strictly controls dual-use articles." Following this, there were no additional questions and the session was brought to a close. The spokesperson thanked the attendees and wished them a good weekend. In assessing the broader context behind these remarks, several important factual updates are relevant. The Tazara Railway, originally built in the 1970s jointly by China, Tanzania and Zambia, is indeed undergoing a major revitalisation. Premier Li Qiang's visit to Zambia marks the highest level Chinese leadership contact with Zambia in decades and is widely seen by analysts as a marker of China's deeper economic engagement in Africa, particularly focused on critical minerals and transport corridors. The concept of a prosperity belt along the railway aligns with China's broader global strategy of linking infrastructure, trade and industry. Japan-China relations have recently entered a sharp diplomatic crisis. Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's remarks in Japan's parliament on 7th November 2025 that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could constitute an existential crisis for Japan triggered protests from Beijing, which demanded a retraction and warned of consequences. China has also imposed trade and travel countermeasures, suspending seafood imports from Japan and issuing travel advisories. On the Taiwan question, Japan has historically maintained an ambiguous posture under Article 9 of its constitution, which renounces war, but since 2015 has adopted security legislation permitting collective self-defense. The current row is seen by many commentators as one of the most serious bilateral tensions in decades. Regarding arms exports, Japan has formally revised its long-standing 3 principles on arms exports to allow for transfers of defence equipment and technology, and has increased defence spending for a number of years. These developments have been cited by China in its criticism of Japanese policy. Given this backdrop, the spokesperson's remarks reflect China's dual thrust: advancing its global infrastructure diplomacy via Africa and simultaneously pressing its security and diplomatic agenda vis-à-vis Japan and the Taiwan issue. In terms of tone and implications, the railway revitalisation narrative projects optimism, investment, regional growth, cooperation, whereas the Japan-China segment projects rising friction, deterrence and rivalry. These reflect 2 parallel theatres in China's engagement: economic development partnerships in the global south and strategic competition in East Asia. From a media analysis perspective, it is worth noting a few angles. On the Africa front, the Tazara revitalisation is more than just a railway project. It taps into Chinese ambitions regarding mineral corridors. Zambia is rich in copper and other minerals, and the integration of China-Africa markets. The prosperity belt language echoes other Chinese regional infrastructure packages. It also responds to historical narratives. Tazara was a Cold War-era symbol of China-Africa solidarity. Reviving it allows China to recast that narrative for the 21st century. On the East Asia front, Japan's foreign policy under Takaichi is seen as more assertive than her predecessors. Her alignment with the US and a more explicit threat calculus vis-à-vis Taiwan has alarmed Beijing. The commentary from China's foreign ministry and the stark language of unwillingness to allow Japanese intervention reflect deep sensitivity over what Beijing considers a core interest. On the arms export/defense buildup issue, it signals how China is willing to push the historical narrative of Japan's post-war pacifism and argue that Japan is shifting away from that trajectory. That in turn fuels Chinese domestic narratives about Japanese remilitarization. When one loops back to what was said at today's press conference, the spokesperson's responses were consistent with this double narrative. On one hand, extolling cooperation and goodwill in Africa, on the other hand, issuing stern warnings in diplomatic security contests. From the transcript of the event, statements such as the wrongful remarks made by the Japanese PM implied the possibility of intervening in the Taiwan question by force, which triggered the outrage and condemnation of the Chinese people. China opposes it. And if Japan truly wants to develop the China-Japan strategic relationship of mutual benefit, it needs to uphold the spirit of the 4 political documents, correct the wrongful remarks and wrongdoings at once, and take practical steps to honor its commitments to China. Echo China's long-standing framing of the Taiwan question as a core interest and of Japan as a challenger to that interest. On the Africa side, the description of Tazara as the bond that binds the peoples of the 3 countries and the commitment to a railway development-driven growth belt show China's framing of infrastructure as a diplomatic vehicle. It is useful to reflect on possible implications. For Zambia and Tanzania, the revitalized railway could unlock access to important mineral export routes, particularly for Zambia, via Tanzanian ports, reduce logistics costs, and integrate regional markets. It also deepens dependency on Chinese investment, which raises questions of debt, governance, and local industrial benefits. For China, such projects help secure strategic access to Africa's minerals, strengthen China-Africa ties, and bolster its global Belt and Road narrative. For Japan-China relations, the current trajectory suggests a phase of heightened diplomatic confrontation with risks of escalation if miscalculations occur. For Taiwan, though not part of the press conference, it means further entanglement of regional alliances and deterrence postures. For global media and policy watchers, the juxtaposition is striking, the same country presenting positive diplomacy in Africa while simultaneously engaging in hardline security diplomacy in Asia. It illustrates the breadth and complexity of contemporary Chinese foreign policy. In the remainder of this piece, I will summarize the key exchanges of the press conference, then provide a short outlook on what to watch next. The press conference began with an overview of the groundbreaking ceremony for the Tazara revitalisation project. A CCTV media question asked for more details. The spokesperson responded that during Premier Li Qiang's visit to Zambia, in conjunction with President Hakainde Hichilema and Vice President Emmanuel Nchimbi, the 3 sides had agreed to jointly build a Tazara Railway prosperity belt, advance comprehensive development along the corridor, and unleash regional development potential in Tanzania and Zambia. It was noted that under the vision of China-Africa cooperation and modernization, the 3 governments aim to make the railway a path to freedom, development, friendship, happiness, green development, and harmony. The principle of mutual respect, equal-footed consultation, and joint contribution for shared benefit was reiterated. The stated goal to inject new impetus into socio-economic development of the 2 countries, Zambia and Tanzania, and surrounding countries, and deliver benefits to the 2 peoples. Next, the topic shifted to Japan. The question referenced social media posts quoting Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi's remarks on Taiwan. The spokesperson said the wrongful remarks triggered the outrage and condemnation of the Chinese people. China opposes it. They added, if Japan truly wants to develop the China-Japan strategic relationship of mutual benefit, it needs to uphold the spirit of the 4 political documents, correct the wrongful remarks and wrongdoings at once, and take practical steps to honor its commitments to China. When a separate question asked about recent reports of Japanese weapons exports, the spokesperson delivered a broad historical and normative critique, recalling post-World War II obligations, continuing to say that Japan has increased its defense budget for 13 consecutive years, removed bans on collective self-defense, replaced arms export principles, and is even starting to export deadly weapons. They concluded, if Japan seeks to go back to the path of militarism, the Chinese people will not allow it, and international community will not allow it. Such attempt will only end in failure.